Hello and welcome everyone to the day two of the India on the Brink Summit. I'm Ritambra Manavi. I'm the Executive Director of Stichting the London Story, and together with Genocide Watch, Alliance Against Genocide, and several other diaspora-led organizations and allies, we are organizing a three-day summit to commemorate 20 years since the Gujarat genocide. Here, we want to make a critical assessment of where India is headed as a nation. Throughout this summit, we are engaging with global experts, thought leaders, policymakers, and implementers to learn how we can defend democratic values and strengthen our commitment to human rights, especially with 200 million Indian Muslims who are facing unprecedented violence under the current government of India. We are painfully aware of the rise in fascism around the world and also in the largest democracy that is India. In this segment, we will first be interacting with our guest, Yvonne Ridley, and thereafter playing some of the videos remarks sent to us by likes of Father Cedric Prakash, Peter Friedrich, Kanja Elia, Arunima Bhargava, and Shamshad Patan. Let me first welcome our plenary guest today, Yvonne Ridley, who is joining us to reflect upon the situation in India. Yvonne is the Secretary General of the European Muslim League. She is also a journalist and author who has worked for several newspapers like the Sunday Times, the Observer, Washington Post, the BBC, the Tehran Times, and more. Yvonne became known when she was captured by Taliban in 2001, and one of the conditions for her release was that she will go and study Quran and Islam. This led her to embrace Islam, after which Yvonne traveled across the Arab world and established the English language version of Al Jazeera in 2013. In 2019, a Canadian institute nominated Yvonne for the Nobel Peace Prize for her work seeking justice against war crimes committed on Rohingya refugees and for Syrian women. In March 2020, in recognition of your services and humanitarian work in the field of journalism, Yvonne was awarded an honorary doctorate at the International Academy of Diplomatic Action in Bern, Switzerland. Welcome, Yvonne, to the summit. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. To everyone who's listening today, salam alaikum, welcome, greetings, and solidarity. Today, I want to personally salute the courage of Muslim student Muskan Khan, who has inspired hundreds of thousands of young girls around the world by standing up to a Hindu far-right mob at her college in Karnataka state. Armed with nothing more than her belief in God, she cried Allahu Akbar at the baying mob, which chose to heckle, bully, and threaten her for nothing more than because of her faith. This is not the first time a single act of defiance has shone an unwelcome light on India, which caused outrage by imposing a ban on the hijab in the southern state of Karnataka. However, if the Indian government thinks Muslim women are a soft target, like the baying Hindu mob that attacked Muskan, they've made a serious error of judgment. Masculinity is used as a weapon in India, where male violence usually goes unchallenged, and those who stand up to it usually do so at great personal cost. Muskan Khan has not only disrupted the narrative of women as victims in India, but her noble defiance has poured scorn on the toxic betrayal that Muslim women are particularly weak, oppressed, and submissive. Our lioness, Muskan, is a symbol against injustice and inequality which plagues Indian society. However, her actions have also highlighted something far more dangerous than the patriarchy, misogyny, or the evils of India's caste system. There are genuine fears that a genocide of Muslims in India could happen. The signs are evident, according to Greg Stanton, the founder and director of Genocide Watch. This is a man who predicted the massacre of the Tutsi in Rwanda years before it took place in 1994. So when he speaks, we should listen. Recently, he told a US congressional hearing there were early signs and processes of genocide in the Indian state of Assam and Indian-administered Kashmir. Genocide is not some event which happens overnight. It is a brutal, wicked process, and we can see the signs woven within the policies pursued by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Modi has previous offences for his vile Islamophobia. Wasn't he the architect of the massacre of Muslims in Gujarat back in 2002, over a 3-day period when thousands were slaughtered and injured? The process accelerated in 2019 when Kashmiris were stripped of their special autonomy and status that they have had for 7 decades. Following closely from that came the Citizenship Amendment Act, which granted citizenship to religious minorities with the exception of Muslims. That it should have been a warning sign to the world. We've seen similar activity in Myanmar, which led to 750,000 Rohingya fleeing to neighbouring Bangladesh, where I saw as they live pitiful lives in makeshift camps. But you know the most frightening thing? The world was first warned about India back in 2002 by Genocide Watch, 20 years ago. And even then, there were early signs of a Muslim genocide to come. What is happening today in India is so much more than the ban on Islamic headscarves, which is nothing but a crude attack on Muslims. But this is not a case of Hindus versus Muslims. Many Hindus are appalled at the treatment Modi and the extremist thugs in the BJP are carrying out. Sunita Viswanath from Hindus for Human Rights has already expressed grave concern about the escalating violence against religious minorities in India under Modi and his Hindu nationalist party, the BJP. She also told a panel of US congressmen and women about the spreading net of persecutions where mobs reign of terror on Muslim groups and interfaith initiatives are evident to see. She believes if the hate and persecution is allowed to continue, all of India's 200 million Muslim citizens will become stateless. Now, I want you to imagine that and the consequences of that. We gathering online here today aren't just concerned about Indian Muslims becoming stateless. We fear for their very existence. What about the humiliation endured by those mothers and daughters who found their photographs posted on an online auction of Muslim women? There is no humor or satire in the threat of slavery. In Haridwar, one of the holiest cities in India for Hindus, there are extremist priests openly calling for the extermination of Muslims. I can give you names and direct quotes, but these miserable politicians and hate preachers are so sick and twisted, they would probably bask in the attention like pigs wallowing in their own filth. Instead, I call on all of you to urge the international community to act. US senators are already advancing Combating International Islamophobia Act by establishing a special envoy at the US State Department to monitor and combat international Islamophobia. This act is already passed in the House and it now needs to get through the state. Countries in Europe should adopt similar policies, especially here in Britain, where there are, unfortunately, Islamophobic elements within the UK government. Last year, the US Holocaust Memorial Museum cited India as having one of the highest likelihoods of genocide in the coming 2 years, 24 months. If those who told us to never forget what happened in the Holocaust during World War II, then I think we should all sit up and listen. If you've suffered or experienced persecution with such devastating consequences, I think you are more than qualified to recognize the early signs of a looming genocide. We as Muslims need to listen to our Jewish cousins and ask for the support of our friends in the Hindu community, as well as Christians, Sikhs, and people of other faith and none. Muslims must stop being isolationist and reach out to our diverse friends. A recent survey revealed that the majority of Indian Americans, for instance, believe that Hindu nationalism poses a serious threat to India. They are making it clear the hate-filled Islamophobic Hindutva extremists are not representative of all Hindus or all Indians. Do not allow their hate and vile rhetoric to fool you. They would love nothing more than for you to retreat within an Islamic bubble. To those observers with us today from the Sikh, Christian, Hindu, Jewish, and Buddhist and other communities, I say this: stop the genocide of Muslims in India, because once they run out of Muslims to persecute, they will then come for you. I started this speech saluting the lioness of the Ummah, Muskan Khan. But you know, there are thousands of courageous, brave Muslim women out there, and many of them could not operate without the love and support of their fathers, husbands, brothers, family, and friends. Another such lioness who is very close to my heart is fellow journalist Rana Ayub. No one knows better than she the dangers of speaking the haq, reporting the truth. She could well be the most hated journalist on the planet for doing nothing more than her job. For more than a decade, she's worked tirelessly exposing the wrongdoings of Narendra Modi and his cronies through her columns and investigations in newspapers around the world, including the Washington Post. What we do know about Modi and his genocidal policies is this: he has a very thin skin and does not like being humiliated on the international stage. As a result, Rana Ayub's life is in danger as she records India's descent into authoritarianism and violent extremism. It was her undercover work in Modi's home state of Gujarat in 2011 that implicated him and his allies in the massacre of the Muslims back in 2002. But just recently, during a BBC interview to discuss the hijab ban and Muslim female students not being allowed into educational institutions wearing their hijab, Ayub was shown a YouTube video of Muskan Khan. Her response was to call the thugs right-wing terrorists. Now she stands accused of sedition and defaming the Hindu community. Last weekend, her grandmother lay dying and she was unable to travel to her home state of Uttar Pradesh to be with her because she feared arrest. What is happening to Ayub is so extreme that the International Centre for Journalists and the University of Sheffield computer scientists are monitoring and analysing the threats against Ayub in real time. And they have seen a shocking storyline of online violence in the data. UN rapporteurs monitoring her case have written to the Indian government on a number of occasions to express their concerns over threats against harassment of Ayub. We must do all we can to protect Ayub and all our lionesses and let the world hear their cries for help. India is a great country, but at the moment it is in the hands of far right-wing thugs with genocidal policies. Unless we can get our politicians around the world to act now on this rogue Indian government, we will all have blood of innocent Muslims on our hands. We cannot and will not allow it to happen. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Yvonne. Those were very forceful and very strong remarks that you put out over here, and very true. You are speaking truth to the power. In fact, all of us gathered in this summit are doing that in our own ways. And I wanted to ask from you, because you also mentioned about political mobilization, that how can diaspora rally behind this idea of political mobilization across the world, also perhaps in Scotland, because you are also a political party member in Scotland from Alba Party. And what is your views and opinions on how far the diaspora has been able to achieve so far, and what can be done further to strengthen this idea that India is no more that vibrant democracy that it used to be, and under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, we are facing an unprecedented attack to our diverse values as well as our constitutional values, and to our defenders and journalists. Please.
Well, I don't want anyone listening to this to think this is so overwhelming, what can I do? Please, to each and every one of you listening today, do not underestimate your own power. I talked of two women for a start off, Muskan Khan and the journalist Ayub. They are two individuals who are making waves by any means possible. Muskan used her voice, and it was recorded on a video phone, and that went viral. As for Rana Ayub, her weapons are her pen and her eyewitness accounts. To the young people listening, get onto the social networks and report and record what you see, what you feel, use poetry, use the arts. To those of us who live in democracies, there are always elections coming up. In Britain, we've got the May Council elections. When people come knocking for your votes, ask them, what are you doing about this threat of genocide? Put them on the spot. Hold your politicians to account. Write letters to the newspapers. Now you might think, well, what good can one letter do? Well, not a great deal, but one letter could lead to more letters. It could lead to a person of influence reading it, being moved by your words. As I say, we were all moved by Muskan's words, Allahu Akbar. How many times has that been shouted in the media and used against the Muslim communities? But when she said it, it went viral and it was powerful. And actions like that are immensely powerful. So please do not underestimate your own abilities. But the other thing is, when you go to the social networks, don't exaggerate, don't lie, don't put out fake news, because you will discredit and undermine the work that others do. The truth is such a powerful weapon. It never changes, it never wavers, it is always there. Stand by the truth and make your politicians listen to what is happening. Because, when somebody says India is on the brink of genocide, and when it comes from a man who saw the Rwandan genocide so many years ago, and no one listened, that would be a bigger crime than anything. For us not to listen, not to take it seriously, and not to act upon it.
Thanks a lot again, Yvonne. I want to ask you a question, and this is coming because you had a long career in journalism, and you still are writing very prolifically. And I want to ask you this in context of what's happening in the global world today, because what we see is that in the European media, apart from, or even the US media, apart from few key moments, for example, with Muskan Khan and the hijab ban and CEA protests, etc., the media tends to forget what exactly is happening in the everyday life of Indian Muslims inside India. So they pick up the key moments, but they forget to actually make a full narrative. So from your experience as a journalist, do you have a suggestion or a comment about how media itself can be a bit more responsible towards reporting what's happening in India and not color coding it or just picking up few quick moments for quick headlines? Thank you.
More Muslims have to get involved in the media now. I know there's a league of mothers out there who have aspirations for their sons and daughters to become doctors and lawyers and engineers. Think about the media as well. As I say, there's nothing more noble than journalism when you are telling the truth and carrying the truth as a message to others. We need to get more of our journalists into the mainstream media. That's one way. We also need to use our influence with the mainstream media. If the mainstream media is packed with white faces from middle-class backgrounds who are fairly secular or maybe Christian in their beliefs, that is where the focus of their concern is going to lie. It's just, you know, the way it is. However, if we can get more Muslims and more diversity into our mainstream media, especially in the West, then I think that that will help a great deal. Because at the moment, you know, the media is very fickle. We've seen that. They're all eyes are on Kiev in the Ukraine at the moment, where another madman is unleashing all sorts of threats and terror on the people of Ukraine. So, you know, we have to become more active in the media. And I have noticed that when times get hard and the going gets tough, some Muslims can retreat into an Islamic bubble. That is the worst thing that we can do. We have to get out there, use strategic alliances. You know, one of the greatest role models in our faith is our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was able to see Islam flourish and develop because he made strategic alliances with people of other faiths and none. And this is what we have to do. And the worst thing that can happen is if we oversimplify this situation in India to a case of Muslims versus Hindus. As we've heard, Hindus in America are appalled with what has been done in their name, just as Hindus in India, I'm sure, feel the same. We have to be able to differentiate between far-right thugs who are willing to act on hate speeches from Modi. You know, they're quite different to most other Hindus in India. So, you know, these are troubled times. We have to analyze and differentiate and not oversimplify where the hate is coming from.
Thanks a lot, Yvonne. I do have a question here from Khalid Ansari, who's asking to know about your take on the role of media as an enabler of fascism and genocide, especially what we have seen in India, starting with just just very recently, this whole narrative of Corona jihad and Tuk jihad and this jihad and that jihad. And we have seen not just the social media, but rather the mainstream Indian media has been very persistently putting out this hateful narrative against Indian Muslims. And how do you see that role of the media, and what do you have to say to them?
Well, India calls itself and loves to call itself the largest democracy in the world. And it did have a vibrant, lively, diverse media. Unfortunately, the standards have fallen, either deliberately or because of this authoritarianism that has come onto the political landscape. And as a result of that, India has slipped from the freedom of the free press league table, has slipped from 120 down to 180. There are only 200 countries in the world, and India, its journalistic standards of excellence have just collapsed, because unfortunately journalists are not free. They're not free to report, and free speech, a free media is an indication of a really strong government. When you get a media that simply parrots the lies and propaganda and distortions from government, then you know that the government is incredibly weak. We see it all over the world. When dictators crack down, the first thing they target is the media. And to those journalists who are pandering to Modi, all I can say is that is not journalism. Journalism is delivering truth, not propaganda. When you deliver propaganda, you are delivering hate speech, and ordinary people who can't differentiate, see the difference, will pick up on that and carry the hate on at grassroots level. That's how authoritarianism works. And so to the journalists in India, you are doing your trade, your profession, your noble profession, no favors at all. And you are ruining India's reputation as once being a great producer of journalism and news. And, I can't think of another country that had such a prolific newspaper readership as India. And now journalism is in the gutter, with a few exceptions. And this is something that the journalist Rana Ayub mentioned. There is a journalist who is being targeted, who is getting death threats. And where is the support from her colleagues in the Indian media? Come on, guys and girls, get a grip and show some solidarity and support for Rana Ayub. You might not like her words, but she speaks the truth, and no one should be punished for writing or speaking the truth.
Thanks a lot, Yvonne. I see there are a couple of other questions. I would like to take at least one more, if that is allowed by you.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So one of the questions over here is about is from Yahir Hussain. Yahir Hussain, I hope I have pronounced your name correctly, who is saying that we as a team have been working closely with the UK politicians on Rohingya situation, and he wants to know that can you lay some base ground to start a motion in UK as minimum, because we need a huge solidarity from the global parliament also on the India issue. And of course, we do not want this to turn how the Rohingya situation has turned. So we do want to have a preventive measure in place there. So your thoughts on it? Thank you.
It's a very good point. We have a device in the UK that if we can get more than 100,000 signatures on a petition, it is then to be debated and discussed in the British Parliament. So perhaps Mr. Hussain would like to reach out to me after we finish this conference, and let's word a petition and try and get, and we should easily get more than 100,000 signatures for this petition, and get this threat of genocide debated in the House of Commons, because Britain has a strategic alliance with India, and it's not in India's interests or Britain's for this genocide or threat of genocide to take place. So these are some things that we can do. Other things that we can look at are any defense weapons that Britain is sending to India. And this is for everyone who's listening, is your country supplying weapons to India? Because India is using weapons, especially in Kashmir, on civilians. And so, governments should think twice before supplying weapons to India if they're going to use it on their civilian population. And, these are also important things to look at. And to the lawyers out there, there are many fine legal brains in the Indian community and in the Muslim community, and maybe pull together and look at legal devices to challenge the Indian government, maybe in the British courts or whichever courts are in your area. I think the Universal Court of Jurisdiction, the rules to that can be applied many places in the world. So if any of Modi's henchmen go and visit your particular country, maybe you could have them arrested for war crimes. There are many, many devices. And the one thing that the Muslim community is not short of is brain power. So get those cells working.
Thanks a lot, Yvonne. And very rightly, you pointed out that there are perhaps a lot more remedies in international law, also with the universal jurisdiction, that might be available for us as a forum and a place to explore. In fact, I would like to tell our audience that today, in a few hours, we also have a panel specifically on international law with a couple of international lawyers who have been working on the case of Rohingya Muslims around the world, and also on the issues of grave human rights violation and genocide. So do join us for that panel as well. I would like to thank you, Yvonne, for this very powerful intervention that you made today, and this powerful opening to the plenary, which sets the day for us. And with this, I would like to thank you. And I would also request my admin team over here to perhaps play some of the pre-recorded messages from Father Prakash. I would like our audience to continue to stay with us if you can, because we have certain very powerful interventions also from Father Prakash, Peter Friedrich, Kanchailia, Shamshad Pathan, and Anurima Bhargava. I would start with the intervention from Father Prakash. He's a Jesuit priest and is also a human rights, peace, and reconciliation activist. Father Prakash was one of those voices who highlighted the gruesome reality of the Gujarat carnage of 2002, and has over the years with others relentlessly campaigned the cause of victim survivors in the quest for justice. So please bear with us while we play.
28th of February, 2002. Black days in Gujarat, black days in India. Those days continued into weeks, into months. It was a reality then, and now it's no longer a reality, but more than that. It has been mainstreamed. What took place in the early hours of the morning of 27th February in the Godhra railway station was tragic, unfortunate. A train car was set on fire and 59 people lost their lives. The loss of life at any time, anywhere, is sad. Families lose a loved one. There is a void which can never be filled. For full 24 hours, nothing happened anywhere. Not in Godhra, not anywhere in Gujarat, and not in anywhere in India. But after 24 hours, all hell broke loose. We know what happened. The Muslims, all of them innocent, were singled out and targeted in a very meticulous manner. It was a sad and bloody chapter in post-independent India. Never before was such a tragedy had taken place. It was reminiscent of what took place in Nazi Germany, the way people were singled out, targeted, brutally murdered, women were raped, people were dishoused, were made to flee and get into oblivion. The sad and most tragic part of the whole thing was that it was a state-sponsored genocide, a carnage. People right at the top, from the ministers, bureaucrats, police officials, and many others were involved. There are enough of reports, analysis, public statements, media reports to say this, to prove this. Any amount of witnesses. There was a citizens' tribunal that was put into place, which indicted several prominent people. What has happened all these years? Since those infamous black days of 27th, 28th February 2002. It's 20 years today. And as we look back, we see a grim tragedy unfolding everywhere. You have a whole community that has been alienated, that has been ostracized, that has been sent to the brink, to the margins, to the peripheries. If you're a Muslim today, in most parts of Gujarat, you cannot buy a house in any upmarket area of any urban locality in the state. You have to live in the peripheries, in selected areas, and this same thing is a reality even in the rural areas. If you're a Muslim, for that matter, any minority, including Christians, you cannot get employment easily. You cannot get a government job easily. There is a meticulous and very focused targeting of minorities. And we see it unfolding even in laws which are draconian. The so-called freedom of religion laws, which were first passed on the 26th of March 2003, just now is being made more severe on the 1st of April 2021, where anyone wanting to embrace another religion first needs to take the permission from a civil authority. It is ridiculous. An adult person, and several high courts, including the Supreme Court, has spoken out against this. Why should a young woman who is an adult, who wants to marry the person of her choice, be prevented from marrying? Why should a person be prevented from choosing the religion of one's choice? Then we have had recently 38 people allegedly responsible for the bomb blast. Any violence, any bomb blast needs to be condemned. But today, capital punishment, the death penalty, is is horrible. It's not accepted in most civilized countries throughout the world. And how do you give the death penalty to these people? Give them a punishment which they deserve. We have seen over the years the unfolding of not merely majoritarianism, but of fascism. And this is serious. India is a democratic country. We have our whole ethos based on diversity, a pluralistic fabric. It is high time the people of India, concerned citizens all over the world, wake up to what is happening in India. We need to address this authoritarianism, this fascism. We need to have both hope and courage to come together in solidarity, in synergy, to ensure that justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity, the dignity and the differences of every single citizen of this country is respected, is propagated, and at the same time protected. We need to pray in the words of Rabindranath Tagore, our Nobel laureate, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake, let the people of India, let the people of the world awake today.
Thank you, Elena, for this very powerful message again from Father Prakash. I would like you to play now the remarks by Anurima Bhargava. She's a commissioner for the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom.
Thank you, Genocide Watch and Dr. Greg Stanton, for inviting the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom to share our understanding of the deteriorating religious freedom conditions in India. Over the past couple of years, the Indian government has increasingly institutionalized its ideological vision of a Hindu state through laws, structural changes, and communications hostile to the country's religious minorities. For this reason, since 2020, USCIRF has recommended that the State Department designate India as a, quote, country of particular concern, end quote, or CPC, for engaging in and tolerating systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom, as defined by the International Religious Freedom Act. I want to briefly discuss some of the concerns underlying the Commission's recommendation, starting with the passage of the Discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act, or CAA, in 2019. While the CAA is said to benefit religious minorities, including Christians, Hindus, and Sikhs, from neighboring Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, the CAA, in fact, singles out Muslims and denies them a path to citizenship afforded to persons of all other faiths. While the CAA's stated purpose is to protect individuals facing persecution in India's neighboring countries, it excludes Hindus persecuted and displaced in neighboring countries like Burma, and Muslim communities facing persecution such as Ahmadis in Pakistan and Shia Muslims in Afghanistan. Of greater concern is that the CAA, in conjunction with the planned National Population Register and National Register of Citizens, could result in the wide-scale disenfranchisement of Indian Muslims, leaving them vulnerable to prolonged detention, deportation, and violence. We have seen this process play out in the northeastern state of Assam, where the multiplicity of harms to the hundreds of thousands left off the NRC rolls has been devastating, including those left off being targeted for harassment, violence, and in detention. This narrative, questioning the citizenship of Muslims and whether they belong in India, is eerily familiar to what has taken place in Burma, where citizenship laws have been used in similar ways as a foundation for the genocide and crimes against humanity perpetrated against Rohingya Muslims. The targeting of religious minorities has also been effectuated by the government's use of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the Sedition Act, and the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act to crack down on civil society and any efforts to serve and support or to document abuses and violence against religious minority communities across India. Many Indian citizens, including community advocates, journalists, or even passersby, documenting deteriorating religious freedom conditions are being charged under the UAPA or the Sedition Act, creating an increasing climate of intimidation and fear and silencing anyone speaking out against religious persecution and violence. The UAPA was used to incriminate the late Jesuit priest, Father Stan Swamy, who died in 2021 at the age of 84, while imprisoned and awaiting trial on unsubstantiated allegations. Numerous organizations that document religious freedom violations or aid marginalized religious communities have been forced to shut down their operations in India under the amendments to the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act. At the end of 2021, the Indian government moved to cut off foreign funding to nearly 6,000 organizations, including Mother Teresa's organization, the Missionaries of Charity, and Oxfam India, and refused to renew those organizations' licenses under the FCRA. Although the Indian government changed course and restored the FCR registration of Missionaries of Charity, thousands of organizations and institutions that support religious minorities still face an imminent threat of closure in India. Indian government officials are also targeting Muslims and Christians, in particular, and placing them in harm's way through the adoption and expansion of anti-conversion laws and the condemnation of interfaith relationships, including efforts to censor media or any public depictions of interfaith relationships. Indians should have the ability to marry as consenting adults across faith. These campaigns targeting and delegitimizing interfaith relationships have led to attacks and arrest of non-Hindus and violence towards any interfaith interaction. The Commission is also concerned about escalating harassment and violence, including at places of worship of religious communities. That harassment and violence is being facilitated and even propelled by hate speech and disinformation shared by government officials. The deteriorating religious conditions in India are of grave concern, and action must be taken immediately to prevent further atrocities from happening and to keep India from wholly abandoning its foundational and constitutional promise to be a secular, pluralistic democracy. Thank you very much for the invitation to share our remarks and our concerns about what is taking place in India at this time.
Thank you for that. Next, we have a pre-recorded intervention from Peter Friedrich. Peter Friedrich is a freelance journalist specializing in analysis of historical and current affairs in South Asia. Most of you who have been on Twitter at least know Peter as a consistent and strong ally in the struggle against rising fascism in India. So I would like to play Peter's intervention. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. On 24 February 2022, a state legislator from Bihar demanded in so many words that the government of India withdraw voting rights from Indian Muslims and make them second-class citizens. The politician, unsurprisingly, hails from India's ruling Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party. Such overtly anti-minority statements probably would have been considered shocking enough to make national headlines 8 years ago, before the BJP came to power. But since 2014, they have become so par for the course that it seems Indian journalists can barely be bothered to bat an eyelash over such an unvarnished demand by an elected official to disenfranchise hundreds of millions of Indian citizens. After all, the socio-political landscape in India has become so desensitized to the mainstreaming of hate that it took over a month for Swami Yati Narasimhanand to be arrested after organizing a conference in December 2021 where he and other speakers openly called for launching a genocide against Indian Muslims. And he was barely behind bars for a month before getting bail. Over the past several years of the Modi regime, beatings and lynchings of Muslims have occurred with such increasing frequency that it's become almost impossible for even the most attentive observer to track or recall all the incidents. Muslims are murdered for allegedly possessing beef. Muslims are stopped in the streets and ordered to chant Hindu religious slogans at the risk of violence, and then beaten even when they cooperate. Muslim men are attacked for being in the company of Hindu women. Muslims are physically assaulted on public transportation in Delhi the capital of the country itself, for accidentally bumping into someone, and on and on and on. Random violence against Muslims to the extent of lynching has been normalized as a daily occurrence in the Modi regime. The only change that we've seen at the outset of 2022 is that the new normal has now expanded to include incessant, explicit calls for genocide from various prominent Hindu nationalist figures, often made in the presence of BJP officials. Calls which are made so frequently that, just like the lynchings of the past 8 years, it's growing difficult to keep up with them all. While Muslims have borne the brunt of violence since 2014, over the past couple of years, and particularly in 2021, the Hindu nationalist forces not only began expanding the overtness of their rhetoric, but also the targets of their violence. Indian Christians are increasingly falling victim to the rising tide of hatred. Documented attacks on Christians have slowly risen, with almost every year since 2014 bringing higher numbers than the previous one. Last year was exceptionally horrific, however, with the total number of incidents being almost twice that of 2020. Violence against Christians absolutely skyrocketed. Thus, it's no surprise that leading Indian Christian groups and figures described 2021 as a year of fear. Just as Islamophobic hatred has become a commonplace feature in the socio-political landscape of Modi's New India, so too is bloodthirsty prejudice against Christians passing from the realm of the extraordinary into the ordinary of the everyday. One need look no further than the October 2021 call issued by a Swami at a rally in Chhattisgarh that was hosted 2 months before the now infamous Haridwar hate conference. Flanked by BJP officials, the Swami denounced conversion to Christianity and urged his followers to behead anyone who tries to proselytize them. But they shouldn't just stop at murdering those who encourage their conversion. They should, said the Swami, proactively target already existing Christians with a strategy of stop, warn, and kill. It was only a matter of time before Christians were destined to join Muslims as top targets of the Hindu nationalist movement. The Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh serves, of course, as the fountainhead of that movement, and the RSS's guru, in detailing his ideology, specifically identified both communities as foreign elements, internal threats, and, in so many words, as traitors, guilty of joining the camp of the enemy merely by virtue of daring to be non-Hindus living in India. All non-Hindus are under threat by the RSS and its Hindu nationalist agenda. In the case of Buddhists, Sikhs, and others, however, the RSS seeks to assimilate them. In the case of both Muslims and Christians, the RSS seeks to eliminate them entirely. Indian Christians have, of course, suffered some truly horrific atrocities at the hands of the RSS BJP in the past 20 plus years, most notably during the Kandhamal pogrom in Odisha in 2008. One major difference from today, however, is that while Kandhamal, which saw perhaps 100 Christians fall victim to the Trishul, produced a far higher body count than we have seen suffered under the Modi regime, that pogrom, like most of the other atrocities against Christians during the past few decades, was a regionally confined atrocity. Attacks on Christians today, in contrast, are spread across large swaths of the country and are even extending into southern India, where the community has historically lived, by and large, safe and sound. Perhaps the most notable aspect of these nationwide attacks on Christians is that the vast majority of them are perpetrated by mobs. Mobs, oftentimes, of hundreds of people. These attacks are also, very frequently, on church services where congregations of 20, 50, 100 or more are gathering to meet. Thus, it's important in contextualizing the level of violence to remember that while there were 505 violent incidents recorded in 2021, each incident might be directly victimizing at any given time dozens of Christians or more. Considering that so many of these are mob attacks, and that the violence is no longer regionally confined, what Dr. John Dayal, one of India's preeminent Indian Christian activists, told me sounds quite rational. As he said, "I will not say that Christians are being massacred 7 days a week, but they can be at a moment's notice." Well, many in the global community are ignorant, willfully or otherwise, of the persecution of Indian Christians. The growing persecution has not escaped notice of international Christian human rights organizations, nor has the source of the persecution. Last year, International Christian Concern, a DC-based watchdog, jointly awarded India and Modi and the RSS's family of organizations its ignominious Persecutor of the Year award. As the organization reported, anti-Christian violence is inspired by the notion of establishing India as a Hindu nation. Voice of the Martyrs, a renowned nonprofit dedicated to defending the human rights of persecuted Christians around the world, labels the environment for Indian Christians as hostile and blames the violence on well-organized Hindu extremist groups who, they explain, view Christians as traitors to the Hindu homeland. Open Doors USA, a nonprofit which focuses on monitoring global persecution of Christians, explains that the driving force behind persecution in India is an ideology that disregards Indian Christians and other religious minorities as true Indians because they have allegiances that lie outside India, and asserts the country should be purified of their presence. Open Doors also issues annual rankings of countries according to the level of persecution faced by Christians. In 2013, a year before the BJP first came to power, Open Doors ranked India 31st among the top 50 countries in the world where persecution of Christians is most severe. This year, indeed this year and for the previous 3 years, India has ranked as the 10th most dangerous country in the world in which to be a Christian. That's higher than, for instance, China or even Saudi Arabia. Notably, while there are 9 other countries where persecution of Christians does rank higher, India has 3 distinguishing factors from them all. First, it is the only legitimate, officially secular democracy on the list. Second, as the second most populated country in the world, its population is more than twice that of all the other 9 combined. Third, it is the only country which is an ally of the United States. The attacks on the Christian community continue in the year 2022 as nothing is being done by the people in power to control it, warned A.C. Michael of the United Christian Forum for Human Rights in late January. That's hardly shocking, considering that, in most cases, those instigating the attacks are documented as leaders or members of RSS-affiliated outfits. If the trend since 2014 is anything to go by, Indian Christians in 2022 will suffer more and ever more violent attacks than they did in each of the previous 8 years. Modi's regime is silently tolerating a looming genocide by forces which seek to swallow up not just Muslims, but also Christians. As it has been said, silence is consent. And considering that Modi's public life began with the RSS, it's reasonable to conclude that his government's silence stems from ideological alignment with the forces of hate who are pushing Indian Christians and Muslims into an existential crisis. The global community, religious or not, must wake up to this threat before it becomes the bloodbath on the brink of which India is now teetering. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for playing that remark. The next remark we are going to play is from Kanta Ilya. Kanta is an Indian political theorist, prolific writer, and a Dalit right activist. His main domain of study and activism is the annihilation of caste. Ilya has been a recipient of Mahatma Jyotirbai Phule Award and was a Nehru Fellow between 1994 and 1997.
Thank you for inviting me to share my views in this global conference on genocide. My name is Kancha Ailaya Shepherd. I live in India, Telangana region and a state. I live in the city of Hyderabad. Now, this global conference on genocide, in the context of the world going through a difficult situation where large scale of killings happening in many parts of the world, particularly in African countries, and in China we have this issue of Rohingyas and other sections and so on. Now there is a war between Russia and Russia has attacked Ukraine. Russia has attacked Ukraine. All of a sudden, there is an invasion going on. Now, literal genocide is happening in Ukraine, and the people there are suffering a mass scale elimination and destruction of property. And few months back, there was a similar situation in Afghanistan. The Taliban rebelled against the existing rulers, and then the then government was completely dislodged and Taliban took over, but mass suffering has taken place. We don't know what kind of deaths happened in that country also. But in Ukraine, the situation is very clear. Hundreds are now being killed. Now it is in this situation. In a country like India, when a right-wing school is ruling, there is also fear for minorities and for Dalits that do we also face a genocidal situation, because some groups, when they organize their conferences, for example, the one which held a conference at Haridwar, gave a call for almost like a genocide kind of a situation. Now, in this situation, even in India, there is an insecurity. Though a mass genocide, after the Gujarat riots and mass genocide has not happened, though there was rioting in Delhi 2 years back. No, it is in this kind of a global environment and Indian environment. I'll briefly sketch out what my understanding of the future India and the world. As the religious fundamentalist forces rule, then this idea of attacking the other enemy forces who are considered to be either opposite religions or people who are opposing their ideology, or people have their own conflicts within. Take, for example, the Russian ruler today, Putin, is a very conservative Christian, Catholic conservative Christian with old Russian church values. And he has made a massive attack on the same kind of spiritual ideological force in Ukraine. They are all Orthodox old church believers. And now Putin seems to think that Ukrainian people are not under his control, and there some kind of a weaponry is being built, and they are going with the European Union and NATO. Therefore, he should straightaway declare war and invade that country and kill hundreds and destroy properties and completely disfigure the whole nation itself. Now, this is happening within the framework of religion, even within one religion. Take, for example, Afghanistan. Taliban are Muslims. The earlier rulers were also Muslims. But there is a difference of view about what kind of Islam the Taliban want to follow and what kind of Islam the then rulers wanted to follow. So it's this kind of religious differences, even within one religion called Islam or Christianity. The similar problem seems to exist within India, though between the right-wing Hindu forces and the minorities. There is a fear that a time might come that there might take place what is known as a genocidal attack, because whether the Christians or Muslims here, they are certainly very, very small minority, as against the constructed view of majority. But actually, given the caste structure of India, only 5 communities rule from Delhi today. Even when Congress was in power, the so-called Hindu majority was never one monolithic view. Even unlike the differences within, let us say, Islam, the Shias and Sunnis, or in Christianity, the Protestant and Catholic, and within them, the classical model of conservative church like the Russian church and the Roman church, which have difference of opinions on many things. Now, within Hinduism, the situation is the Shudras, who constitute 52%, don't have a place to make any decision within Hindu religion, or even within Hindutva, what they call Hindutva. Though the secular intellectuals, the liberals, constructed an idea of majoritarianism versus minoritarianism, but the 52% Shudras have no intellectual role either in the RSS or in the BJP. They are mainly producers, they are artisans, they are cultivators. The farmers' agitation itself is an example. The farmers' struggle lost 750 people. So, it is not just one-dimensional death trap that is happening as being talked about. It is not, so-called majority and so-called minority. In fact, the entire agrarian masses are far more majority when compared to the small minority communities like Brahmins, Banyas, who own the entire industrial economy, the Brahmins who own all the religious power, all the intellectual power, all the media power in their hands. Shudras don't have. Even communities like Jats, Gujars, Patels, Reddys, Kammas, who have some regional political power, but they have no decisive role in Hindu structure, nor do they have any ideologically deciding role in RSS, BJP, or what they call Hindutva. So the problem in a multi-caste and also multi-race, India has the historical Indo-African, Indo-Asian African race, and then we have Mongoloid race in the east. We have Dravidian and then Aryan races right now. So caste and race and religion has complicated the Indian society. We have Hinduism, the Brahmins, the Banyas, the Kayasthas and Khatris and Kshatriyas. These five communities which do not participate in productive work, but they do business, they do intellectual tasks, they work in service sector, control the economy, everything, religion and so on. Whereas the food producing masses don't contribute any intellectual level issues. They don't matter there. But they produce the whole food, they produce the whole technology, they produce the whole, they are the civilization builders. So there is that injustice historically. Unfortunately, the Muslim intellectuals did not speak about it. The Christian intellectuals did not speak about that history, long history of oppression of the Dalits, who constitute 16.8%. The Adivasis, who constitute 77%. The Shudras, who constitute 52%. And they are only regional rulers with some regional parties. But they cannot rule India from Delhi. So in this scenario, violence has been part of this caste system. So caste structure itself was an institution of constant genocidal, cultural, civilizational practicing system. Dalits die on daily basis and they get raped. So unfortunately, 800 years of Muslim rule did not do anything substantial to them, nor they did not even teach them their ruling language called Persian at that time. The Brahmins and Banyas and others who own Sanskrit as a religious language, they do not teach that to the Shudras, Dalits, Adivasis. So they don't own any intellectual domain and they just live within India. So unlike the Muslims and Christians who have fellow citizenship, spiritual citizenship outside India. In this scenario, my fear is, to stop all kinds of violence. In a country of caste and massive women's inequality and patriarchal oppression, all kinds of intellectuals have to make a serious study of Indian civilization along with the global civilizations and the murders taking place. Say, for example, the blacks of America could rebel for killing one black on the road during the pandemic time. And there was a mass upsurge against that. So in India, nothing of that kind of mass upsurge for oppressing and brutalizing, constructing inequality into its complete system never happened. So the Muslims who ruled this country for a long time also did not bother about it, did not talk about it. And the Christians who have English education in their hands never taught to us. So this makes any violence vulnerable by the illiterate just following masses of the Dalits, Shudras and Adivasis. Because whatever the Brahmin intellectual, the Dvija, what we call the Dvijas, with a kind of caste racist control, whatever they say, these masses follow because they are ignorant. They become muzzle power for the intellectuals that come from the other caste. So we have a very different kind of atmosphere in India, and I want the global intellectuals to focus on Indian history. First, its caste system. Who were these Shudras? Why were they unequal in the system for 3,500 years, ever since the Aryan migration happened here? Until today, they are unequal. And who are these untouchables, Dalits, who faced genocidal situations from time to time, and even today, and they never rebelled? You know, in a long history of India, of such an old civilization, there was never a civil war in this country. Because the Shudras and Dalits, Adivasis, never rebelled against the existing rulers. So they suffered all kinds of rules. They suffered the Brahmin rules, they suffered the Muslim rule. Now they are suffering lack of globally established English language education and suffering lack of intellectual resource. So we are only handful Shudra, Dalit, Adivasi intellectuals who keep on struggling, keep on writing, but we have hardly any space in the world. Suppose if I write an article, New York Times does not print it, Washington Post does not print it, or Guardian does not print it, or CNN does not interview me, or Fox News does not interview me, BBC does not interview me. It interviews people who have the global kind of presence. So we are in a way stuck in the within Indian borders as an historically oppressed mass. And in this discourse of historical genocidal conditions and global environment, I want all of you to seriously focus on India. Look at its caste system, look at its untouchability, look at its status, the status of minorities in India, and try to work out ways and means to stop all kinds of possible violences that are likely to occur here. And I am scared while going through what is happening in Ukraine, the kind of brutal bombing that can take place on humanity in this 21st century. So this kind of mindless human genocidal tendencies, I was that scared to go through the whole process that happened in Afghanistan, the kind of suffering that women went through there. No human being, human society should allow this. And if such things happen in India, it will be the biggest problem to the world. So we will see that India comes out of this problem, and we want to work towards abolition of caste and untouchability, and work with all intellectuals, whether they are Brahmin, whether they are Banya, whether they are Muslims, whether they are Christians, who support our cause, because we suffered biggest violence in human history because of the caste and untouchability. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, everyone, for staying with us. I'm being mindful for the time, and we have only 5 minutes left before the start of the next panel. So we would like to end this panel over here and move on to our next one, which is India's Nuremberg laws legalizing genocide with Nadim Khan. So please do join us there. And I would once again like to thank Yvonne for being the plenary speaker for this one. And thank